Hi, everybody. Just going to give everyone a couple of minutes here to join us and get logged in and get settled. If you are joining us, please share in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm joining from Seattle, obviously. That's where Book Larder is, if you don't know already. But it's always fun to see where people are joining from. Some issues with the chat here. Just let me see what I can do. Okay, that should be fixed. Hello, Minneapolis, Olympia, Seattle, Whidbey Island, New Mexico. I always feel like I'm reading at the Miss America contestants when I do this. Tampa, Florida. Different weather to Seattle, I'm guessing. All right, it looks like we have a good number of people logged in, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. I am Nisha. I am the events manager here at Book Larder in Seattle. If you don't know us already, we are all cookbooks and food writing. We've been here for almost 14 years, which is amazing. We do all kinds of author events in person, but we also started these Zoom events during the pandemic, and it's been really nice to occasionally do them still. It's a nice way to kind of gather with authors and people from all over the world who can't come to the store. So it's really nice to be able to gather with you all like this. So thanks for joining us today. I'm very excited to be joined by Alissa and Polina today. Alissa is a food historian, cultural historian, author, food writer, the previous author of Salt and Thyme, and this is her new book, Kapusta, Vegetable Forward Recipes from Eastern Europe. Some of you may already have a copy. If not, I'm going to pop a link in the chat, and you can purchase a signed copy from Book Larder. Just a really, really beautiful, beautiful book. As a object, stunning illustrations, beautiful photography, which is common to Alissa's work. But a beautiful look at Eastern European cuisine. And Alissa writes, in defining Eastern European cuisine, since the dawn of time, the geographical position of the region, with its abundance of rivers, forests, mountains, and plains, made it the perfect highway for explorers, traders, invaders, and settlers, and so produced a cultural and hence culinary landscape of extraordinary variety, ranging as far and wide as the Slavs, the Romans, the Greeks, Bulgars, Tatar Mongols, the Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarians, the Roma, and the Ashkenazi Jews. No other part of Europe can boast such a cornucopia of histories and flavors. And Alissa is going to be joined by Book Larder's former culinary director, Polina Chesnakova, who many of you may know, also a cookbook author of several books, including her new book, which is forthcoming this fall from Hardy Grant, which we're very excited about. So I'm going to hand it over to Alissa and Polina if they would like to join me.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So lovely to be here.
Nisha, thank you so much for the introduction. Alissa, congratulations on this stunning, stunning book. It's also so nice to see so many familiar names in our lineup of guests. So I'm really excited to dive into this book with you, Alissa, today. I guess what I wanted to start with is, I think everyone that is tuned in today is aware that yesterday marked 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. And anyone that's followed you the past few years knows that you've been such a huge advocate for Ukraine and its people and their fight for sovereignty. And I think it was last week you wrote in a recent post that Kapusta was, and I quote you, born out of the profound heartbreak of the war in Ukraine, and it's full of stories and recipes exploring the country. And then you went on to dedicate the book to Ukraine and its people. I was wondering if you could expound more on how the book came about and what was going on in your life and in the world when you started working on it.
Thanks, Polina. Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start because it's something that's really close to my heart and to everything I've been doing for the past 3 years. And Kapusta most definitely came out of that. Cook for Ukraine was a really wonderful reminder of just how powerful a language food can be and its ability to bring people together in the most difficult of times, and really to sort of cross borders and share stories with people from all over the world. Is this ability to really transcend the perceived differences, and it's something that has really become so palpable to me through working with Cook for Ukraine. And also, on the other hand, still realizing that there's so little known about Ukraine and that Eastern Europe is still sort of veiled in a bit of confusion and misunderstanding, for all sorts of reasons. It's not to sort of be condescending towards people saying, oh, you don't know anything. It's a natural process, partly deliberately through Russia's sort of propaganda and, deliberate denial of Ukraine's cultural, culinary, linguistic sovereignty. And it really felt like a natural thing for me to turn my attention more to Ukraine, but also through Ukraine towards Eastern Europe more broadly, and to really kind of try to define this part of the world through its history, through the conflict, but also kind of hopefully bring out this wonderful duality of how much beauty and resilience can be born out of a very complex historical and political climate. And while doing Cook for Ukraine, we've come across so many wonderful people, so many wonderful cooks and food writers. And it was just mind-boggling to realize just how diverse Ukraine's cuisine is and how diverse the culinary map of Ukraine is. And that, of course, made me wonder, because you can't really talk about Ukraine without talking about its connection to its neighbors. Again, for various historical and political reasons, the way the borders have shifted and the way certain parts of Ukraine were absolved into sort of temporary political entities like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, for example, or Austro-Hungarian Empire. And of course, all of that leaves its mark on the culinary culture. And sort of through that, I started delving and kind of educating myself, really. I'm not here to claim that I've known everything there is to know about Eastern Europe. I have my personal connection to Ukraine, personal connection to the, very complex Soviet regime and the life of kind of post-Soviet person as well. But of course, I didn't know that much about, the further parts from, Poland and Czechoslovakia, the former Czechoslovakia, or Hungary. So it was a real journey for me, delving into my own roots, but also delving further into the region itself.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, knowing that, you have Eastern European descent, but you actually were born in Siberia, in the city of Omsk, which is closer to Central Asia than many of
Yeah.
these countries that you highlight. Did you feel like many of the traditions and elements of Eastern European cooking was something that you grew up on, or did you find that many of these elements were new to you when you started writing the book?
Well, it's, Siberia is, such a complex place. It's steeped in trauma of forced resettlement and invasion and so on. So, you know, a really big part of the demographic of Siberia is made up of people from Eastern Europe, you know, ethnic Eastern Europeans who have been displaced, you know, by force or by various sort of historical circumstances. And my family is, you know, an example of that. You know, I have one side of my family who were Ukrainian peasants from the Kherson region who were forcibly removed from their land in the sort of early 1910s and were sent into Siberia. And the other side of the family is Ukrainian Jews who were moved to Siberia, escaping the Nazi invasion of Ukraine. So of course they, you know, it's only we're talking sort of the last 100 years or so, and of course people like the members of my own family, you know, bring their own culinary heritage with them. So there was definitely, no, I would say that I grew up on a diet of Eastern European cuisine for sure. You know, there's obviously there's some influence from Central Asia, as you rightly say, because Omsk is very close to Kazakhstan. There's this whole kind of phenomenon of standard uniform Soviet canteen style cuisine that everyone grew up on. So there's a real mix of different culinary influences, but certainly I would say, you know, I'm sort of Eastern European in terms of the kind of the taste buds and the kind of the dishes that I grew up with. But at the same time, it's very different in a way that, you know, the seasons are very different. And, you know, I mean, obviously, Eastern Europe itself is so vast and so diverse that different parts of Eastern Europe are, you know, the way the people eat is different too. But I would say that Siberia is definitely a lot less diverse in its produce. And even the same dishes, you know, if we talk about borscht, the iconic Ukrainian soup, you know, just the sheer diversity of the versions of borscht that exist in Ukraine, depending on the season, depending on the region. There was nothing like that in Siberia, of course. There was sort of a one standard dish that within my own family was made differently depending on who cooks it. But kind of generally speaking, borscht was kind of considered as one dish. Whereas in Ukraine, if you delve into the culture of making borscht, it's an actual, you know, it's like a culinary genre. It's almost a, you know, another word for soup. And there's so many different versions of that soup that you just kind of almost get dizzy with excitement, realizing just how diverse and exciting these variations can be.
Right. It's almost like there's as many recipes as there are cooks preparing the dish.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
you started putting together the book, obviously there are some family recipes, but how did you go about, you know, looking at other countries and collecting recipes? I mean, just paging and reading it's so apparent how much research and thought you put into the book. So how did you, yeah, I'm just like so curious how you collected recipes from so many different countries and cultures that don't even have their own country. You know, you highlight the Tatars and the Udmurts. I've never even heard of them until I read your book, but yeah, I'm curious to learn more about that process.
So I really enjoyed that process, and I think I was sort of really indulging my geeky side, or kind of the historian's side of me. So I sort of started off by general reading, just kind of reading broadly about the history of Eastern Europe and Ukraine, and sort of just understanding, just for myself, to really understand the different connections, because obviously, as someone who was brought up in Russia, I really was very aware of not retaining any sort of residual imperialist stance that you just can't help but absorb growing up in the country. You know, luckily I haven't lived there for almost 30 years now, and never espoused anything, you know, kind of ideologically that comes out of Russia. But still, it was very important to me to try and not sort of get caught in that. So I feel like I've really was almost kind of rewiring my brain and understanding the geography and the history and the relationship between different countries without seeing it from the perspective of Russia. So that, you know, that was quite important. And in terms of the cuisine, you know, once I've decided on the countries that I wanted to be in the book, and that was a process that I worked on with the publisher a little. So we kind of settled on using the UN's definition of Eastern Europe. So as not to kind of make it personal, or, because, it was really interesting actually talking to people, like to Zuza, for example, who's a close friend and who was really helpful in sort of brainstorming with me. And, she was saying that, many Poles would actually find it a bit offensive being considered as Eastern Europeans, because they prefer to think of themselves as Central European. But obviously, it's a very recent phenomenon. And again, it's kind of, this question of self-identification versus a kind of a more historical identification of a country or a nation. So that, those questions were playing on my mind, and I didn't want to misrepresent anyone. So I kind of stuck to the UN's definition, which is sort of kind of an official geopolitical list of countries. And then once I've had the list, um, I went into it from different angles. There was one angle of talking to people whom I've known already. So reaching out to friends from those countries and having a chat to them about their family stories, the dishes that they grew up with, things that they remember fondly when they think of their childhood or their grandmother, kind of the ultimate sort of food memories. Then there was the marvelous Instagram, where I've put out a call for participants. I did a questionnaire, again, asking kind of similar things about, regional cuisine, family cooking traditions, key ingredients, key sort of items on the menu. If you were to cook a dish that represents your country or your region, what would you have on this dish? I mean, on the menu. So then it was really lovely. Lots of people got in touch, and I had about, I can't remember the exact number, but maybe around 50 people who answered the questionnaire, from far and wide, from Eastern Europe. It was also quite fun. I'm an obsessive cookbook hoarder, so it was quite fun giving myself the license to just purchase lots of new cookbooks. New, I mean, isn't just new for my collection, but they were actually mostly kind of old, little known cookbooks that you find, online for like 99p somewhere. So I've purchased quite a lot of those. And then also I found some really interesting sort of travelogue blogs where people travel around Eastern Europe. For example, writing about the Romani cuisine. This is something that I didn't know, but I really felt it was important to include their cuisine in the story. And there were lots of really lovely online resources. There's some restaurants that have a little blog section where you can read the story of the founders, just kind of explore their menus. There are also really lovely travelogues where people traveled and cooked with members of the Roma community. So it's been, unfortunately, I wasn't able to travel personally to the region and to kind of do some field work. But I felt like I've managed to gather quite a lot of really amazing information just being online and reaching out to people.
Well, and I think too, it allowed you, like you said, collect other stories and food memories, and include recipes from different contributors. Like I've been really drawn to the recipes by, is it Firuza? And she's of Tatar background, and I know Nigel Lawson highlighted her potato, trying to find it.
Yeah, that's quite amazing to see that.
Trying to.
Yeah, it felt really special to have people contributing stories about their family members, and just knowing that her granny's story is now sort of in print and people can relate to it, and it's just really heartwarming to be able to do that.
And you had an unexpected contributor who is your own daughter, Rosie.
Yeah, she's the youngest contributor who is so proud of herself. Oh, bless her. It was really lovely because there she is on her dish. Yeah. It's really amazing. It was really special that, I was pregnant with her when I was writing my first book, Salt and Thyme. So she's there in the pictures where I'm pregnant. And then, she's, I guess, just through being around with me in the kitchen all the time, she's quite a keen foodie. and she really loved helping me develop recipes for Kapusta. So, we've been together in the kitchen for months and months, messing around with dough and ferments and all sorts of lovely things. And yeah, I mean, it was just really amazing to see her, imagination starting to travel. And, she just randomly came up with this combo. And I thought,
It sounds
actually,
so good.
it's a really good idea. And she was like, really? And like, you know what? I'm going to put that in the book. And she was just completely blown away by that.
Right. For those who don't have it, it's stir fry with buckwheat, mushrooms, pancetta, and kimchi, which
It
sounds
really
so
does taste
good.
delicious. I mean,
Yeah,
you can replace, obviously, kimchi is not an Eastern European ingredient, but
right.
it's, that sort of tang. Obviously, it's sauerkraut, so you can replace kimchi with sauerkraut. And it's just a really perfect sort of Eastern European palate that, it just ticks all the right boxes. I thought it was
Right.
brilliant.
Well, and it was sweet too, because I think it goes back to, cooking in the Eastern European kitchen is often a family affair. And like I loved, is this your, I'm assuming, is this your mother?
It is, yeah, yeah.
At first I was like, who's this lady? And I was like, oh, she resembles Alissa a lot. But I just like loved being able to see, and even in this picture, I don't know if those can see it, but you're holding your son.
Yeah, yeah. It was a really lovely moment. And what I loved about the shooting the book, that obviously we had a plan, but there were so many like lovely improvised moments, and that was one of them where my mum was there helping with the baby who was only 2 months old then, and I was just sitting there breastfeeding him and helping her, sort of guiding her through how to shape the dumplings, and then the photographer obviously pulled the frame out a bit more to
That's
include
so
me and the baby. And that was just, it suddenly became this completely improvised, but like really meaningful meditation on, family traditions and
yeah.
motherhood. And yeah, it was just lovely.
Um, and I guess we can jump ahead, but speaking of photography, I mean, the photos in the book are so beautiful and stunning. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the process? And I remember reading somewhere that a lot of the props and textiles that you use are actually from Ukraine too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was really lucky with the team, and with the publisher, Hardy Grant. Um, I knew that I would be in safe hands because I absolutely adore the books that they produce. Just the aesthetic quality is absolutely top notch, and I had a sort of a general idea of how I wanted the book to look. I really wanted to have to be kind of truthful to the style of the countries, and have a little bit of sort of folkloric vibe to it, a bit of sort of nostalgic vibe to it, but also obviously keep it modern to reflect the way that I cook at home. And I made a mood board from kind of just different other books and Instagram, but I kind of left it at that. I really trusted the team. I had an amazing team of the photographer Laura Edwards and prop stylist Tabitha Hawkins and Tamara Voss, the food stylist. I've worked with Tamara before, but the other two were completely new to me. I love their work, so I knew that they would create something magical. And the other kind of contribution that I did was to ask for a favor from the lovely Natalia Cummings, who runs Experience Ukraine and Beyond. So she runs culinary tours in Ukraine and Georgia, and she also has like an online shop where she sells Ukrainian antiques, fabrics, clothes, crockery, kind of household items. So she was very kind to donate, to lend out some props. So it was really lovely to have something authentic again, because we were not able to travel. It was really lovely to be able to have something real from Ukraine. And then, and then the rest was literally just the magic of the team. We shot the book in 2 stages, one phase in the summer and the other one in winter, one at my own home in London, and the other one in a really lovely studio in London as well. And I really don't know how they managed to create this sense of being at the source. I would look at the pictures, knowing that it's actually my own home. I know exactly what the picture was taken, but looking at it in the book, it suddenly feels like I'm in, some kind of beautiful Eastern European house in Moldova, somewhere in the middle of the countryside. It really was magical. I'm absolutely in awe of them and just blown away by the result. And obviously the design as well, the graphic design, is a huge part of that. It just pulls sort of everything together, and just the color of the pages and obviously the graphics of that opening each chapter is just stunning.
Well, and the illustrations too. I feel like the illustrations really make the book just as much as the photos do. And the cover is just like, it's just jaw-dropping. Did you know from the start that you wanted an illustrated cover, or did you all play around with a photo for the cover?
Yeah, no, we definitely wanted an illustration from the start, some kind of graphic stuff. And Kapusta was definitely, cabbage was definitely the hero ingredient. I
Did you know
didn't.
from the start you wanted, like, I'm always, as an author myself and going through the book process, did you know from the start that, okay, Kapusta is going to be my hero of the book and have it on the cover, or was that something that came about later on?
No, it was definitely there from the start, because originally, yeah, I mean, the title Kapusta was there, that was the name of the proposal. And initially I even wanted the whole book to be just about cabbage, but the publisher sort of guided me to expand it a little bit, and Kapusta became a symbol of Eastern European cooking and this sort of culinary philosophy. But I really wanted to have cabbage on the cover in some form. I didn't realize it's going to be sort of that beautifully prominent, but I did say, I love cabbage from the aesthetic point of view. Just the details of the leaves and the layers is just so stunning. So I kind of wanted to have some kind of a motif. But then, the illustrator went for it and created this most stunning, portrait of cabbage, which I just can't get enough of.
Yeah. And kind of speaking about cabbage, you mentioned that it was sort of, yes, it's something that's, a foundational ingredient in Eastern European cooking, but it was also became symbolic for your own journey and also the cuisine. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think in terms of my own journey, it was something. It was kind of a symbolic of my experience of going from having this sort of inferiority complex about the cuisine of Eastern Europe and the cuisine that I grew up with, to then stepping up to this task and really sort of owning it, and empowering myself with that history and the knowledge, and the experience of eating and cooking with cabbage. Because obviously we all know that cabbage generally has a really bad rep. The smell, the blandness, you name it. And it sort of, becomes as a stand-in for the horrific socialist reality of, living under Soviet regime or the socialist regime. And there's obviously truth to that, but I actually kind of see the beauty in that. To me, it's precisely because of that. To me, cabbage has become the symbol of the resilience of Eastern Europe and the resilience of the cuisine of Eastern Europe. And people really don't take it for granted, just how essential such a humble vegetable can be in nourishing the family, in literally, saving your life, whether it's in the form of ferments, which again, is such a huge pillar of the cuisine, and it's beautifully metaphoric, and allows us to really delve into all these sort of complexities, and the poverty, yet the reverence towards food, and the ability to do the most with the very limited ingredients that you have, this kind of innate knowledge of nutrition and understanding how you can really enhance the the nutrient value of what you're cooking with. So there's so many different ways in which Kapusta really just becomes this wonder vegetable that allows us to explore history, explore culture, and have fun cooking. and it looks beautiful. So, I love that, the book hopefully once and for all proves that, cooking with cabbage is a really aesthetic experience, and those dishes look absolutely stunning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think just looking at the book, through the book, it really, I think one of your main goals is sort of to kind of flip these common stereotypes on their head of Eastern European cuisine, and that has carried so much stigma, like you said, over the years. And I think you did such a wonderful job of creating and putting together recipes that are vibrant and inviting, and as the Brits say, very Moorish. Um, and you celebrate Eastern cuisine through the five most common vegetables, and then you also decided to include dumplings and fermentation. What was that something that you knew from the start that you wanted to include those two sort of areas, or were there other considerations there?
I initially I wanted to stick to the vegetable chapters to kind of have this principle of vegetable as a sort of guiding principle of the book. But then obviously, it's just when I was collecting recipes, there were so many dumplings, and obviously I could not indulge my obsession of fermentation either. So it sort of became, if you have a cabbage recipe chapter, then you have this whole section within it on fermentation. And then, how do you choose which, because often the dumplings would have the filling that combines a few of the vegetables. So, kind of how do you choose which chapter to put a dumpling that uses 3 of the vegetables from the book? So the more I sort of thought about it, it really felt quite natural to separate the dumplings and the ferments into their own dedicated chapters, and then that sort of allows you to draw all the other vegetables into it. And again, it kind of emphasizes that narrative of the Kapusta philosophy and the approach to food, because again, dumplings are a fantastic sort of technique or culinary genre almost that speaks to us about resilience, sustainability, low waste eating. This is kind of a common sense tradition of just preserving leftovers, or into encasing them into dough and then freezing them, and then you have yourself a really nourishing and very quick meal. And of course the same goes for fermentation. That is the sort of the quintessential sustainable way of eating, is to preserve your vegetables.
Right. And speaking of dumplings and being resourceful in sort of taking scraps or whatever you have in the kitchen, turning it into a filling and encasing it with dough, you have, oh, here it is, a recipe for how would you call it, knish?
Niche, yeah.
And you wrote that that you would these days pick knishes over pyrashki. And I noticed this sort of through line through the book, that you really kind of delve into your Ashkenazi Jewish background. Was that something that was like new for you, kind of diving into it, or was it a result of writing this book, or
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey for me. I think well, ever since I started writing about food, obviously writing about my family history and the food that I grew up with was a huge part of what I did. And the figure of my great grandmother, who was a Ukrainian Jew and who was the main feeder in my family for the first 10 years of my life, is paramount. She's such a huge influence that I wouldn't be who I am without her. So naturally, her cuisine was always part of what I did. Initially, it was perhaps less of a conscious choice. It was just a natural thing of just telling my family story, and which happened to be, partly Jewish. But the more I delve, the more I kind of developed my style, my interest as a food writer, I really felt called to revisit my, because before I became a food writer, I had an academic career in film history and cultural history of the Soviet Union, where I focused on the Jewish history and, you know, history of the Holocaust and the cultural memory of the Holocaust. So that sort of knowledge that I already had, obviously food wasn't part of my studies then, I suddenly felt really called to bring, kind of revive that existing interest and knowledge, marrying it with my personal story of my great grandmother, but then obviously introducing, you know, the research element and delving further into the history of Ashkenazi cuisine. And yeah, Kapusta was definitely, no, I was already doing that, but Kapusta was really the ground that allowed me to really indulge my interest. And I was sort of worried, like, oh, am I going a bit too far? Maybe it's, you know, not everyone is expecting to see that many Ashkenazi dishes, but then, you know, Ashkenazi cuisine is such a huge part of Eastern European culinary landscape, and, you know, the Ashkenazi Jews played such a big part in shaping not only within the region, but also shaping our understanding of what Eastern European cuisine is in general through their migration to the States, and, you know, kind of the Ashkenazi Jews from New York. You know, that's kind of where pretty much the whole world then gets their idea of what Eastern European food is about. So, you know, it felt like a really important, and both sort of as a historian, you know, felt really important to create this narrative line, appreciating the contribution of the Ashkenazi Jews to the story of Eastern European cuisine, but also it was just such a personal fascination, and it was just really exciting to uncover all these recipes that I sort of, you know, either vaguely remembered or actually I didn't even know that existed in our family. And the quiche is such a fantastic example because I got completely obsessed with it. I read all these articles and books about quiches. I, you know, tried all sorts of different recipes, and this is something that I didn't grow up with when I was a kid. And then when my mom came for the shoot, I was so excited to share the quiches with her. And I was, you know, while they were still cooking, I was explaining to her what they were. And then once she tasted them, she said, "Oh my God, but my gran did make these. I just didn't know they were called quiches." And then for some reason, you know, some recipes, you know, you don't really sort of take them on into your own family. And for some reason, I don't know why, my mom kind of never really brought the quiche with her, kind of as a grown up herself. So it was just, yeah, it was almost like unearthing this family recipe, which I didn't actually realize that it used to be part of my family's culinary tradition.
And it's neat too that you're able to kind of take some of these traditions. One of the things that I love that you do as a cookbook author is that you take a lot of you know, for you, familiar flavors and dishes and kind of reimagining them to make them feel a little bit more modern or kind of give them a new look. And that just makes me think of the, again, I don't know how to pronounce it,
Timus, yeah.
Okay. And that started off as a stew, right?
Yeah.
And turned it into a carrot cake.
Yeah. I really got obsessed with, sorry, I'm saying that I get obsessed with lots of things, but I really did.
Original stew, but I just thought it was so so neat that you're able to kind of take that and turn it into a cake of all things.
Well, it was a really interesting thing that Tim is such a, as I call it, like a culinary shapeshifter, because you know, I was researching the recipes and talking to fellow Ashkenazi food writers and asking them, you know, what is tzimmes for you and your family? What did you cook when you made tzimmes? And there was such a variety, from a savory side dish to a main course with meat, to sort of like a sweet dessert of stewed carrots with honey and prunes. And then even the savory dish itself, depending on where it is, because timis is a real kind of symbol of Ashkenazi displacement and the, you know, the constant traveling of the diaspora. So, you know, you find recipes as far and wide as the Balkans and Argentina and Brazil, and kind of depending on where you are, then you would have very different ingredients. So even the savory meat stews would often have, you know, things like pineapples or, you know, prunes and raisins, and so it's a real sort of Ashkenazi thing of having this play of sweet and savory and sour and sweet flavors. So I thought, well, it's almost like, as long as you have carrots, prunes, and some kind of a spice, whether it's cinnamon or ginger, you kind of have yourself a version of tzimmus. So I thought, well, carrots and prunes are such a lovely combo. So was ginger and cinnamon, and it really kind of was calling to me as a cake. So yeah, I just developed that recipe with, essentially a carrot cake that's spiked with apricots, walnuts, and prunes, and it really is good, I have to say.
That's so good. I have all the ingredients for that recipe, so I might even make it tonight.
Please, yeah. And the best thing about it is that it's so simple. It's like super humble. You just, you put it together. You don't need much. You can, oh yeah, you don't even need to go shopping for it. You most likely will have all the ingredients in your larder anyway.
Well, that's Eastern European cooking for you, right?
Exactly.
Well, before I hand it over to our audience, when I'm doing an interview, I always like to do a rapid fire round of questions. So are you game? Okay.
Let's do it.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. Question number 1. Sour cream or dill?
Oh my goodness. Oh, you can't have them apart. But I guess if I had to choose one, yeah, dill. Yeah.
Dill, okay. I would actually choose sour cream, so that's favorite dumpling in the book.
Oh, I think I would. Oh, there's so many. It's so hard. I think
Sorry.
favorites. Can I choose two? Just
Of course.
one favorite as a sort of as a consumer favorite would be pierogi with sauerkraut and mushrooms. You just can't beat that flavor. It's just insane. And I'm actually have a collaboration now in London with a lovely chain called Ugly Dumplings, who have put this specific one on the menu. So if anyone who's
Okay.
listening now in London, please go and try it. But as a food writer, I would go for the udmurt dumplings with raspberry and beetroot, just because it was such an exciting discovery to unearth this idea of making a filling for the dumplings with beetroot and raspberry. And so it's a sweet dumpling. I love the Eastern European tradition of sweet dumplings, but obviously I couldn't really indulge that given the theme of the book. And then I found this wonderful one with beetroot, and it's just so delicious. It really is quite unique. So I'm quite proud of that.
It looks so good. I never even think to put beets and raspberries
I
together.
know.
In Georgian cuisine, they love beets and plums, but raspberries are.
And it does make sense. It's almost like pomegranate molasses. It kind of gives it
Yeah.
this vibe.
Raspberries are a little bit tangy. Recipe that gave you the most trouble in developing.
It would have to be the one that didn't make it into the book. And I'm sort of bummed by it because it was a really exciting one, but I just couldn't get it right. It would have gone into the potato chapter, and quite an unusual one because it's actually a dessert dish. It's also a dumpling made with potato dough. It comes from, well, it's actually, there's a version of that in pretty much every Eastern European cuisine, including the Austrian cuisine as well. They're called gambos, so it's like slivers gambos in Hungary. And it's this really light dough, which is made with mashed potato. And then you have a half of a plum that you encase in it. And you boil that. And then you make a crumb of sweet, so breadcrumbs fried in sweet butter. And then you coat the dumpling in that. It sounds amazing. I've seen some really beautiful recipes like that, but I've tested it at least 3 times. I've given it to other people to test, and all the reviews are like, not really kind of don't get it, and no one in my family liked it. So I thought, like, I really, as much as I love the idea of it, it just didn't work, unfortunately. So I think I might keep going at it because it's really bothering me that I couldn't sort of crack it, and I might just share it as a sort of postscriptum Kapusta recipe.
Maybe you can give your signature reimagining of deconstructing it or
Yeah, we'll do something with it. Yeah, that.
yeah. Well, speaking of potatoes, what's your favorite potato recipe in the book?
I think that would have to be the Ukrainian tovchanka. It's so simple, and it's something that you think like, how did I not think of that myself? It's such a like a sort of almost obvious thing. So it's basically like mashed potato, but it's made with white beans and onions, and then you serve it. You melt butter and you sort of stew the poppy seeds in butter, and then you pour it on top. Traditionally, it's just made, you boil the potatoes, then you mash them with the beans, but I sort of developed it a bit more, just the cooking method to bring the flavor out a bit more. So you braise you fry the onions and then you braise the potatoes and the white beans with in a stock, veggie or chicken broth with lots of bay leaf. So really to kind of infuse it with flavor, and then you mash it kind of quite roughly, and then you pour the poppy seeds on top. And it's insane. It's so delicious. I can't recommend it enough.
My stomach's rumbling. I highly recommend not looking through this book when you're hungry. Okay, so recipe you cook at home the most.
That would have to be the mushroom paprikash from the Hungarian repertoire. This is something that I mean, I've had it before, but I sort of kind of, yeah, it never felt like it's my own. But developing the recipe for the cookbook, I've cooked it so many times, and I was really amazed by how it just comes together so quickly and how little ingredients create such potent flavor. It's just this combination of paprika, smoked paprika, red peppers, mushrooms, and sour cream. There's something about those four that's when they come together, oh my goodness, it's just so delicious. And, for anyone with a family, if you have small kids, because it has pasta, so that's a definite yes. And it literally like comes together in 10 minutes, full of nutrients, full of flavor. It's a staple now in my family.
Sounds so good. You're looking to take on a weekend cooking project. Which recipe will you make?
I quite like, and this is something I haven't cooked much. I quite like the Tatar dish called pierikachevnik, which is it comes from the Polish Tatar community, and is this traditionally it's quite a big celebratory pie, like essentially like a giant snail pie, where you can have meat in it as well. But equally it is delicious just with potatoes and mushrooms. It's quite big, so it takes a bit of time to get all the ingredients together, and then if you have guests around, it's quite a lovely showstopper. Like the original recipe that I found is like 3 kilos or something. It's like a newborn baby. But mine is sort of a more user-friendly version. But if you want to go the kind of traditional Tatar celebration, then definitely that's quite a fun weekend project.
Okay. Well, this was so fun talking to you about the book. I have more questions for you, but I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to include them in the chat or in the Q&A. First question is, I don't have a copy of the cookbook yet, but are there some sources listed for the general culture? My family comes from across the region, and I'd love to learn more as I cook. I'm not quite sure. Are there some sources listed for the general culture?
As in like reading, or I have a list at the back.
Yeah, I think it is sort of further reading.
Oh, for the reading. No, actually, I don't. I mean, I do sort of reference some authors and stories in the introduction to the recipes. But yeah, I don't have like a suggested reading list or anything like that. I do have a list of suppliers, one for the UK, one for the US, and also a list of restaurants and sort of cafes and restaurants, which is always quite a nice sort of starting point to go and try the dishes. You know, if you for whichever reason can't cook all of them, and obviously my by no means my list of recipes is an exhaustive one. So hopefully that one can also be quite helpful, that list.
Anastasia asks, what is the hardest to source ingredient in the Western countries for your recipes in the book?
You know what? I'm really excited to say that there aren't any super specialist ingredients. That's kind of what I find really appealing with this book, that, you know, most of the dishes you can cook from the ingredients that you probably already have in your kitchen. So you don't need to do a kind of a special Kapusta trip to the shops. I would, and also even the ones that, you know, things like tvarog, you know, the cottage cheese, sour cream, unrefined sunflower oil, which I would definitely recommend that you get them from an Eastern European shop. But even if you don't have them, the recipes work really well. You know, you can replace sunflower oil with good rapeseed oil, even olive oil in many dishes. Ricotta is always a good stand-in my kitchen for tvarog, for cottage cheese, or any kind of farmers market cheeses. So it's a really flexible, very, very approachable, very friendly cookbook.
What is the main starches in the region? Potato?
Yeah, potato is a real, you know, the kind of life savior, and it's really interesting to see, like in Belarus, for example, potato is known as the second bread. In the Ashkenazi tradition, you know, that combination of potato and sour cream is, I love it how, you know, it comes out of necessity to really boost the nutrient value. So it's, you know, to use fats and starch for that, but actually it tastes insanely delicious as well. So it's a really lovely sort of common sense and kind of that kind of intuitive knowledge of nutrition, which, you know, people develop out of necessity. So yeah, potatoes is you know, sacred starch in the region for sure.
Aaron writes, love your work so much, Alissa. Excited
No,
to
thank you.
Can you expand a bit on how you have modernized recipes? Your work feels very modern, although I know it's very traditional. How did you filter recipes from the perspective of a modern kitchen?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, some recipes are very obvious in the way that, you know, they need to be slightly updated. For example, there's a dish of a Czech soup called kyselitsa, which is a really lovely soup of sauerkraut, mushrooms, and potatoes with sour cream. But the original recipe, which, you know, goes back so almost sort of Middle Ages in Moravia, it had lard or pancetta, or some kind of pork fat. It also had the sort of the starter with butter and flour. It had cream and sour cream. So, you know, you just felt really heavy. And I was like, there's absolutely no way I can just bring myself to even to test the recipe. Kind of just reading the ingredients felt, you know, my liver started to hurt from just reading that. So I thought, okay, this one definitely needs lightening up a little bit to kind of, you know, modernize it for the contemporary palate. So that was kind of one obvious example. There are also some dishes where you just I think mostly to just lighten it up by maybe removing the lard or just the kind of meat quantity to and, you know, to make it more sort of truthful to the way I cook at home. You know, I'm not vegetarian, but we mostly eat vegetables and, you know, kind of meat, you know, every now and again. So it was that kind of really bringing out the vegetable more and removing the sort of heavy, creamy elements from some dishes.
Alexandra asks, what is an upcoming meal you're looking forward to?
From the book or in general? Well, I have a cooking class at home. It's the first time that I'm inviting people into my kitchen, into my house. And we're gonna do a cooking class on knishes. So it's gonna be hands-on cooking experience of making knishes all together. And then I'm gonna pre-make a few dishes as well, like borscht and uh, like a fermented sort of platter. And then we're just going to sit down and eat what we make and what I've pre-made. So I'm really looking forward to that, to sort of cooking together with people that I don't know, and yeah, just sharing stories around the table.
I wish I lived in London. I would definitely stop in. I
think we have time for just one more question.
Okay. Someone says, very excited to cook these recipes for my family. We'll say dumplings seem intimidating. Is there a recipe in the book that would be a good start?
So I'm with you on that, and actually it was quite fun. I don't know what happened to me, but I'm in awe of food writers like you, Polina, who do lots of baking, because baking is just something that doesn't come naturally to me. Working with dough doesn't come naturally to me at all. So the dumplings chapter was quite a challenge, but I really felt drawn to it. I really loved, stepping out of my comfort zone, and it was quite fun to have my daughter by my side, sort of messing around with the dough. And actually, I think it's a bit of a mental block as well. There's actually nothing difficult about dumplings at all. If you have the time, if you are in the right kind of frame of mind, you're not rushing anywhere. It's very meditative and it's fun. It's like a fun arts and crafts activity. The dough is foolproof. Like there's nothing that can, if you talk about, baking bread and stuff, then that's a different story. But dough for dumplings, it's like Play-Doh. It's so simple to make. It doesn't require any skill whatsoever. And then, it's quite fun. It's just you and your family. No one is judging you. So just, if it doesn't look right, or it doesn't, you're not happy with how it looks or how it shapes, just keep going. It's something that your hands kind of learn really quickly, and by dumpling number 10 you're just going to be like a pro. So I honestly don't think there's anything that's really that intimidating. But if I were to suggest a starting point, I would definitely go with something like the Polish pierogi. Perhaps the Tatar manti are a bit of a sort of maybe next level, because the shaping is quite specific, and also you are working with sort of quite finely diced vegetables, so it's not as easy to encase them. But yeah, if you start with the Polish pierogi or the Ashkenazi krepla, I don't think you can go wrong at all.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alissa, so much for spending your US launch day with us. The book comes out today. We're extremely excited. We do have signed copies available to purchase. So I put a link in the chat to where you can purchase that if you would like to support Alissa and support the store today. And of course, we have copies of Polina's books available as well. And yeah, what a wonderful conversation, and I'm excited to dive further into this book after hearing you two talk. And this talk was recorded, so if you'd like to share it with anyone, it'll be live on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Thank you so much. It was
Bye,
lovely.
Alissa.
Bye,
Thank
Alyssa.
you. Bye. Thanks, Polina. Bye.